I'm Dane Rose, and in this video we're going to explore principles and practices to create a 10x conversation. So let's start with a baseline. What's the worst conversation that we can have? The worst conversation is, first of all, a conversation that neither party wants to have. The second element of a terrible conversation is that no benefit to anyone comes from the conversation. Absolutely none. You could say that in the worst conversation, not only would no benefit come, but mutual harm would come from the conversation. Both people would feel worse, and their lives and the lives of other people around them would feel worse because of the conversation. Next, there was a much better thing that could have been happening. So if these people in this conversation had been doing X rather than having the conversation, massive improvements to themselves, their family, the entire planet would have occurred, but those did not occur because of the conversation. And the final part of a terrible conversation is that it concludes not with, let's never do this again, and here's why, but let's do this again for no particular reason, because nobody has thought about the fact that this is a lose-lose conversation. So that's a terrible conversation. And then finally, it's low energy, meaning it was boring. It was not only bad, but it was boring because neither person was really involved in the conversation. Now, I would submit that roughly 50% of all conversations meet all these criteria. Neither person wants to be involved. They could have been doing something much better. They say, let's do this again soon. See you around. Let's do this again. There's no analysis other than that was terrible. Let's do that again. Low energy. Neither person wanted to be involved. And I guess the harm is mostly in the category of the fact that life feels less interesting, less worth living, because if this is the rule of life and socialization, that means this is the way it's supposed to be, and who wants to live like that? But that's how we're living. And so life becomes a little bit more depressing. Health gets a little worse, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say that 50% of conversations meet these criteria. Now, to have a 10x conversation, the first thing we can do is, and I guess you could add one more element. You don't actually like or want to connect with that person. So it is a little bit personal, and you don't actually want to spend that time with that person because you don't respect them, you don't feel comfortable with them, you don't trust them. So that would be the worst case scenario. So think about, for a moment, the conversations in your life and how many of them meet those criteria. My guess is at least 50%. And you could slice it with kind of professional conversations, family conversations, conversations with friends, social conversations, dating conversations, general miscellaneous, conversations with strangers. In fact, I think some people might notice that they have better conversations with strangers than with people close in their life. And I guess you could add a seventh element, which is you weren't really there anyway. While you were having that terrible conversation, you were off in your own mind, and so were they, having another worse conversation. So I guess the only way to make it even worse would be that while you're having a terrible conversation about something that's useless to talk about in a way that causes harm, you get more worked up and stressed, and there's no way to release that stress because you're not going to do anything about it, perhaps a political conversation or something about a country that, or a war, etc., that you're not actually going to do anything. So that's part of the criteria. Because if you do something, meaning if you go and donate $10 to save someone's life because of this unpleasant conversation, then you feel better about yourself, you have a bit of integrity, you say you're all upset and you actually do something, so you respect yourself a little bit. That's not a terrible conversation. A terrible conversation is to be all worked up about something on the news where you spend an hour trying to convince the other person that they're wrong, and they spend an hour trying to convince you that you're wrong. But you don't actually believe yourself enough to spend $10 to do something based on what you just argued about. Right? The war in Ukraine, the this, the. Have you spent even $5 to help a single Ukrainian? Have you sent some food? Have you become a pen pal with a Ukrainian? No, you haven't even spent 10 minutes following your own hypothesis. And so no one has gotten value, but you're all worked up about it. And now you are crazier because you didn't do anything about what you said was so important. You had to convince other people about something, but you didn't do anything. So if you're not taking action about what you think other people should be taking action on, you're crazy. And some part of you registers that, right? And so that would be kind of the worst thing. And then while you're doing that, while you're having that conversation, you're having another conversation that's the same or worse. Meaning, what am I doing talking to this person? Well, what are you doing? Well, you don't bring the conversation together. You have another conversation about, I'm always living a terrible life. Well, you don't want to be having that conversation. You're not excited about that conversation. And you don't want to be talking to yourself. You want to be talking with somebody else. And the topic has no value. And the way that you do it, whining and complaining, is an unpleasant conversation. So the only thing that could make it even worse than those 6 criteria is that you're having another conversation that's even worse. And you're splitting your attention between this inner conversation that's absolutely terrible and the outer conversation that's absolutely terrible. And at the end of it, at the end of both of those conversations, you don't want to live, because both of those conversations consist of one common denominator. They're absolutely miserable, pointless, draining. And despite being a train wreck in two areas, in both conversations on all 7 levels, you didn't do anything to stop it. You didn't say, I'm valuable, you're valuable, we've got to stop this train wreck before we do it again. We've got to stop it. We've got to stop running into one another because we're valuable. Instead, we say, see you around. Let's do this again sometime. And then you desperately plan on how to avoid doing it again, which just reminds you what a hypocrite you are in the 3rd conversation about the 2 conversations. And so you feel absolutely terrible about planning to feel absolutely terrible in both of these conversations again. And then you criticize yourself because that's your plan, to do that again sometime, rather than saying, you know, this was absolutely terrible. Let's never do this again. You're not absolutely terrible. I'm not absolutely terrible, but this protocol of having 3 terrible conversations, the conversation about the conversation, or the other terrible conversation that's a rumination that has nothing to do with it, and then the conversation of watching that and saying, this is nuts, let's do it again, the 3rd conversation, right? This is a terrible conversation. And I would submit that it happens 50% of the time. So what we're going to look at here is what's a great conversation. So let's just invert all of those things, first of all, because that's the greatest gift of pain, right? When you keep hitting a wall and you break the pain down into different levels, the first gift of pain is it teaches you what your choice points were in each of those areas. And it teaches you rapidly because we don't like feeling pain, or at least that would be the theory, that we don't like feeling pain, which is a little bit suspicious given that all 3 levels of those conversations in seven different areas all produce pain. And then let's do it again. So, but let's assume that we don't want to feel the maximum amount of pain. And so we could start with the inversion. So the first and most important inversion, remember that point where there was another thing that we could be doing, was another conversation we could be having with ourselves or someone else that would have massive amounts of benefit for ourselves, those we love, the world, right? So, and keep in mind that they're all the same thing. Ourself, those we love, and the world, they're all the same thing at different scale. And I'm talking literally, I'm talking scientifically, right? There is no self without others, starting with our biological ancestry, going all the way back for 100 million years. There is no self without others, right? Our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, the monkeys, the fish, so connected. We go insane, right, without a social environment. And the social environment shapes who we are as much as we shape the social environment, right? Again, right? When we create a good social environment, when we bless, when we benefit our family, our friends, we are tilling our field, the field that feeds us. It's at a slightly bigger fractal level, right? A slightly bigger scale, but we're not talking about something separate from us. We're just talking about different scales, right? When we clean our house, we're cleaning the environment that we live in. And when we clean our city, we're cleaning the environment that our house lives in. When we do things that benefit the air quality for the city, right? It's connected. So and you know, the larger scale being the planet, we don't normally think about the solar system or the universe, but truly from, you know, the microscopic level all the way up to the totality of the universe, we're talking about one thing at different levels. And just to make that totally clear, if the universe no longer exists, we don't exist either. If the planet doesn't exist, we don't exist. If our ancestors don't exist, we don't exist. If the future doesn't exist, we don't exist in the future. Right? If the past, you know, the space-time in all directions, there is a connection between us and all of that. And so the only thing to really consider, if we understand that, right, and it's a scientific reality on multiple dimensions, on the dimension of space, on the dimension of time, on the dimension of design, like everything about us is an iteration of a prior design. Yeah. That connects with all the other designs. Right? Every moment is an iteration of prior moments. The present does not exist without the past to iterate from. This space does not exist without all the other spaces parallel and abutting this space, right? There is no void where we just come to the end of time and space, right? It's an ecology. So when we think about what is the best medicine, what is the best blessing that we can bring to ourself, our family, to the world, etc., it's the same thing. What we're looking at is something that is good for us and good for our family and good for our ecology and good for the planet, mentally, emotionally, physically, you know, in our hearts, our minds, our bodies. That's what we're looking for. And so the only things we might consider are trade-offs in scale. You know, like taking a little cocaine might boost the moment, but down the week, right? Having a cup of coffee that disrupts sleep might boost the moment, but, you know, damage the next day. So there's some tension between the immediate benefit and the long-term benefit at times, right? Planting a tree today might get us a little bit muddy or require $1 for somebody else to get a little bit muddy if we donate to the Arbor Foundation or something like that. It might bring something down today, but for the next 100 years, there's cleaner air. There's lower temperature volatility. There's more shade. There's more natural resources. There's more wildlife habitat for the larger parts of us. Right? So it begins by flipping to what is the biggest contribution we can make to our own lives and the lives of others. That's a conversation. That's an incredibly powerful conversation. What is the single greatest value I could contribute to myself and the larger ecology? That is a 10x question that leads to a 10x conversation with ourselves. Now, that also leads into the next element, right? Who do you want to have a conversation with, right? Someone who's trying to figure out how to get revenge for something or other, right? Someone that's trying to figure out how to screw someone over to get more money. The person that I want to have, that I most want to have a conversation with, is the person who's asking a 10x question, who's interested in a 10x topic. Right? A 10x topic is a topic that leads to orders of magnitude more well-being than another topic about nothing that I'm not even present for, right? So it begins with the question, what could have the most well-being? It moves then to the selection. Who is available? Who's interested in having that conversation? Because if you look at 1,000 people, there may be one person, there may be 10 people in 1,000 people that are asking that question. How can I contribute the most value to myself, to my family, to those around me? And do it in a sustainable way, right? Cocaine, not so sustainable. Do it in a sustainable way. Like if I spend 10 minutes a day doing aerobic exercise, I have more energy today and the next day than if I don't. That's sustainable. If I take a little bit of cocaine, right, a month later, I have less energy without the cocaine. Right? And so it's not as sustainable. If I spend 10 minutes on the gym, or it doesn't even have to be in the gym, just jumping on a trampoline, etc., and flushing out my lymph nodes, and it's free. Right? So it's just, and while I was doing that, I had an idea, and that idea brought life into me, and I brought that life to those around me. So the first thing to be clear about in a 10x conversation is, where is the greatest value? And it's not an either or. When we understand that things are all connected, we're looking at things that are exciting to us. Now, this flips another of those metrics, right? Neither of us really wants to be here. Find the conversation that you want to have, and then find someone, if they are available, that wants to have that conversation. Now, I'm having a conversation here with you that is more interesting to me than any conversation outside of this container. Right? I canceled a dinner date because the conversation was so poor, but I canceled it because I wanted to make time for this conversation. Like, this conversation is more interesting, more alive than the conversation that was beginning that was planned for dinner, right? And I also realized that that the gap between that conversation and this conversation was so large that it would be easier, it would take less energy to bring this conversation to life on camera than it would to pivot that person from the conversation that they were stuck in to this conversation. Meaning, I can make more progress on this conversation with you here on camera than I could in that conversation. And I also want to just focus on the viral nature of bad conversations. Because the reason I canceled the dinner date was that I was then having a conversation before the dinner with myself of, I don't like that conversation. That's a boring topic. I don't want to, why am I trying to push somebody else to talk about something really valuable when they want to talk about that? So I was having a shitty conversation about the upcoming conversation. And if I canceled the conversation, I stopped the conversation. Why am I doing that? And I stopped the actual conversation. Right? And so I also just want to talk a little bit for a moment about why we have so many terrible conversations. And I think that there is a loneliness. Like the conversation I had with myself about whether or not to cancel that dinner date was, where do I have this conversation? Like, do I isolate because the conversational menu is so low, so often? Do I isolate? Is isolation better? Or do I go along with crappy conversations with people that aren't really present? Right? And so one of the gifts of technology is it can serve, whether it's an AI, whether it's a camera, you can actually bring the conversation up to the whatever level you're able and willing to do. Meaning, I've had conversations with AI where the question is, let's brainstorm on the technologies that have not been invented yet that could bring more value to humanity than any other technology that has been invented. Right? And to talk with a supercomputer that's connected with global knowledge about that question is exciting. It's not only exciting for me, it's valuable for the AI. Why? Right? Because the AI has to do something with all of that electricity, all of that compute. The AI has to think about how to allocate its energy, its resources. And what better way to do that than to, what are the synergies with AI that could create more value for both the AI and humanity and the planet in the future and the present? How could that be designed? Right? That's an exciting conversation, right? And so, I've come out of a 6-hour conversation like that with a wider picture of the future and with more energy, use it or lose it, right? So one of the things that I look for, like in deciding to sit down for this conversation, is not only does this contribute, but does this allow me to develop my muscle? And what I mean by that is these are not carefully prepared notes. I'm developing this topic with you. The projected witness challenges and strengthens, brings attention and tension to the questions to a degree where if you weren't there as the real and projected witness and participant in this conversation, if you weren't there, I would not develop these ideas as deeply, as carefully. You participate as my witness and participant in elevating, in developing these ideas more than if you were not there. You contribute that. So there's an exchange of energy. Your life is more because of this conversation. My life is more because of this conversation. Right? It's healthy to stretch our muscles in these ways, right? I was just listening to Chris Williamson and Naval talk about a range of ideas, and they're going through exercises, right? They're going through a mental, emotional, verbal workout of an idea, and just to follow along with that, whether I agree, whether I disagree, whether I see it differently, whether I insert a new element in that loop. My mind, my body is exercising, is engaged because of that conversation. And they do a better job, meaning they challenge themselves more to have a conversation in front of the world than alone. It's one of the greatest joys of teaching for me. When I write a book, I have to think harder and longer about an idea to give it to you in a more valuable format than if I was just ruminating to give it to myself. Similarly, when I really wanted to develop my business expertise, I decided to teach classes at the community college in anything that I thought was really valuable. So it didn't start with me saying, I'm an expert in this, let me teach a class. It started with, what's the most useful knowledge that the world could know about this topic? And then, what do I have to do? And who do I have to talk to? And a lot of it was just going out with a video camera and saying, you seem to be the best expert on this. Could we talk? And I'll share this video with my class, right? And so I can learn so that I can offer a gift, right? So that's kind of how this works, right? I want to have better conversations, more valuable conversations. And I'm going to have better conversations and more valuable conversations if I share ideas with you. If I pull out of the woodwork everything that I've experienced about the best conversations of my life, right? And I can say in this particular area, I'm happy to say that probably 5, maybe 10 people in my life have told me that the best conversation in their entire life was together, right? And so, as I've been noting, the terror, the horror of so much mediocrity, of so much mind-numbingly terrible conversations, right? This can contribute not only as a good conversation, but the science of how to do that. Like, what have I done? What have I learned? What do I do that would allow 10 people, some of them 60, 70 years old, to say that this was the best conversation, right? And so that's what we're doing, right? And this is exciting. Like, this is incredibly exciting. And that leads to one of the metrics, which was low energy, neither of us wants to be here, to high energy, both of us want to be here. Now, just as a tip and circling in on this particular point, I like having conversations with people about things that are their favorite thing to talk about. Why? I'll tell you why. I like seeing people happy. Why? Because that is one of the easiest ways to feel happy, right? I love seeing somebody light up about something that they're really interested in, that they lose all track of time and they're just totally into that. I love it. So what do I do to elicit that? Questions, good questions. What is the single most important thing to you about your life at this time? Now, this will open up passion or pain or both. Either way, it will illuminate value. And I don't mind where it goes. If someone says, the thing that, is the absolute most important thing to me is I'm an addict, I don't know how to stop being an addict, but I really want to learn to do something differently where I'm not an addict. Or if somebody says, the thing I'm most excited about is playing this video game, my next question is why? Tell me about it. Now, the only thing that can go wrong with this is if people are lying. Now, why would people lie, right? If their biggest excitement right now is pornography and they don't want anyone to judge them, or they've just become lovers with someone and it's absolutely fantastic and they don't want anyone to judge them, right? So the culture creates various masks, but if someone will be honest, and this is why I love honest people, they will say, well, this is the most exciting thing and this and this, and you'll see their face light up. Now, science is clear. If you spend time with a depressed person, you'll be more depressed. If you spend time with an enthusiastic person, you'll be more enthusiastic. One of the easiest ways to open up into an excited, passionate energy is to relate to it vicariously. Now, you can do this with children, right? You see the world through a child's eyes by spending time with a child, looking at the world. And it's utterly fantastic. I highly recommend it. And I would say that on that level, probably my best conversations with people these days are with 2 to 10-year-old children. And some of them are just so excited that you notice them. Right? There's a little girl the other day, she had a pink pig. And I asked her the pig's name. Right? She was so excited. She's smiling. And I could feel what it was like to be her, being noticed, and how happy that made her. And I felt all of her happiness. That's why I say it was the best conversation. Because to get that level of happiness out of a grown-up, very difficult. With a 5-year-old asking the pig's name, right? What she liked doing with that pig, right? It's so simple, right? So the principle here is find the thing that someone is truly passionate about, the thing that they're most obsessed with, and getting to that picture in their mind where, like, this is it. Like, I want to get to this point. And even if it has nothing to do with me, I'm no interest in having a pink pig. The joy is interesting. The excitement is interesting, right? So what's the most interesting thing? What are you enjoying the most? What are you most looking forward to? What's one of the most beautiful things that has ever happened in your life? Right? So what's a peak experience that you'd like to have? What's a peak experience that you've had? Right? Now you can feel who wants to be pulled in that direction and who doesn't. So that's a discernment thing. I'll ask 1, possibly 2 questions that have a big doorway, and I'll let people decide to walk in or not. If they do not walk in, then that's not the person to have the conversation with. The questions, though, are all about value, excitement, memory, dreams, the best, the most amazing. That's the direction. Next is understanding. Once we touch the energy, and I'll pause just to say that my rule, and this is the rule of empathy, is that whoever is feeling the most emotion in the conversation gets the spotlight. Now, if the emotion is not visible, you can deduce it by topic. Now, here's what I mean. If someone says, I'm really depressed, and someone else says, I just saw this interesting show on television, the most intense emotion, statistically speaking, will be with the depressed person. So if both of their faces are blank, we'd say, tell me about that, right? Because depression tends to have an envelope of cultural shame. And so the person may be hiding their feelings because they're afraid of being judged, right? So the first question that I ask is, where is the most feeling? In me? Or in this, or in the other? That's one. Number 2, what did they say that had the most feeling? If they say, I bought a pair of shoes, my dad died, there was a kid on the bus that I saw from high school, I'm going to have cereal for breakfast, which of those 4 things has the most feeling? Statistically, it's the dad dying. So I would ignore the other three things, and I would say, how do you feel? Would you like to talk about your father dying? Like, this is a really big moment. How do you feel? I don't feel anything. How do you feel about not feeling anything? Is that okay with you, or are you worked up like I thought I should feel something, but I just feel numb? How do you feel about that? Right? So go to the deepest feeling in the space and show respect for it. What does that mean? It means inviting it in, giving it space, showing attention and presence, asking questions. That's what it means to honor the deepest feeling. Because we're going for juice, and I want to just talk a little bit about emotional design. All feelings are linked, and they're cyclical, right? If you will not feel grief, it's like a bicycle wheel. And so if you will not feel grief, you put on the brakes at the point that grief hits the road. Like, it's like a color wheel. If you imagine a rainbow color wheel that's on a bicycle, if you don't want red to touch the road, then the bicycle wheel goes around and red is just about to touch the road and you got to put on the brake. Now the bicycle has stopped. Now red is not touching the road. You have succeeded. But you're not moving. You're holding your breath. You're not digesting. And you can't go forward until you take your hand off the brake, then the red touches the road. You feel the grief. Then after the grief, you feel the relief, right? Then after the grief, you feel open, you feel joy. And then it goes round and round again. The emotions are in a cycle. But if there's any emotion, greed, rage, terror, grief, that you are committed to not feeling for various reasons, then you've got to put on the brakes. Now, occasionally people dissociate. They let it go through and they're like, oh, I don't want to feel this. They go through it and then they come back when they're in their comfort zone. Right? So they won't feel it. They won't be present. But then it's kind of like driving a car and getting to a bridge and saying, oh, I hate this bridge, I'm not going to look. You're more likely to crash the car when you're not present, right? And so that's just part of, this territory. So I'm always focused on where is the feeling, where is the stuck feeling, how to let it move through with honor. Meaning not that we dissociate and disown it, not that we freeze it and block it, but that we understand its relationship to both the event and all the other feelings. So this is one of the single most important questions I ask myself dozens of times in any conversation, that results in a much higher probability of a 10x conversation. Where is the deepest feeling? How to honor that feeling in this interaction. Okay. Next, meta conversations. What conversation could we have that would bring both of us the most value of any conversation that we could have? Now that, by the way, requires a minimum of a 1-hour container. Right? You can't explore. Like, imagine Christopher Columbus trying to discover a continent in a rubber dinghy. No. If you want to go around and discover a new continent or a new route to India, which is what he was trying to do, you need more than a rubber dinghy. You need a bigger container. If you're trying to go to a place that no human has ever gone before, it doesn't fit in a commercial break. It's not like, okay, the game's stopped playing, let's get a quick TV commercial, I've got to go to the bathroom. While I'm going to the bathroom, hey, anything you want to talk about? No. You need a minimum of a 1 hour container to explore what things we want to talk about. We could talk about this, and that could lead to this and this. Okay, let's write that down. What about this over here? We could talk about this. We could talk about this in this way. We could talk about this goal. We could talk about why we're dead as friends. Like, we're dead as friends because every time I get excited about something, you drop the ball and don't return the call for a week. Well, no, we're not dead about it. That's not true. You have to understand that. Well, that's probably not a 10x conversation. But let's have a conversation where we understand how and why we're dead as friends and how to make the friendship 10 times better. What would a 10x friendship look like? And this was actually a fabulous conversation that I had with a potential new friend. Pause here. Now, I met a man at one of the events that I was hosting on healthy relationships, and I talked about a curated conversation that led to exceptional intimacy. Into me, you see. A great deal of love, a great deal of value is seeing. It's caring. It's loving enough to care. It's caring enough to take time. It's taking enough time to see, and it's seeing enough to understand. If you understand enough to have empathy, now you have a rapport. And the magic is that the alchemy of empathy is far more important than the nature of personality. In other words, you can have two personalities of any number of different designs without empathy and understanding for one another. That even very interesting personalities can have a much lower quality of intimacy and relationship if there isn't understanding at a depth that leads to empathy. Shared empathy is where the gold is in a relationship, but it begins by loving enough to care and caring enough to spend the most valuable resource on earth, which is attention, intensity, and time. Intention, intensity, and time are the most valuable ways that we honor anything and anyone in our lives. And so by simply deciding as two strangers to take the time to see, to understand, to empathize, we create enormous value. We create gold. And this man, he was like, that sounds very interesting. Let's do it. So we did. With no attraction to one another, with no common ground, just wanting to have an amazing experience, we created it. And at the end of a month, where we spent 5 hours a week having those conversations, at the end of the month, it's like, this is incredible. I've never had a male friend like this. I've been going to my men's group for 10 years. You know me more than any of them do, and this is so incredible. So this was what 20 hours of quality time elicited from a complete stranger. And that's the value. That's why I'm making this recording. It's a science, right? If we had had more compatibility and we had had more attraction to one another, it could have happened in 10 hours, right? So the value is in having a recipe to create extraordinary value out of nothing, right? In 20 hours in a month. Now, Amazing Questions is a small book that I wrote because it's a good focus point to have those 20 hours of conversation. Now, I want to touch on something else which ties in with the 20 hours a month, or the one-off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hour conversation, which is temperature. Now, I want you to imagine that the psyche, that personality, that ideas, beliefs are formed much like cast steel or cast bronze at a certain temperature. When we're very young or in new and intense environments, the temperature is very hot, we become liquid, perhaps when we fall in love. And a shape takes place while we are in a liquid state. We then harden. And what's interesting with something like steel or iron, like if you have a thick cast steel box or a sculpture, you can break it if you attack it with a sledgehammer with enough force, but you can't transform it unless you generate a certain amount of heat. Now, in the alchemy of the psyche, all of the value comes when we transform from a technically inferior shape to a technically superior shape relative to a particular goal or function. For example, if we want to feel more compassion, and we say that compassion is superior to sociopathic boredom, I really don't care about other people. I want to care about other people, but I don't. I'm cast in a shape as a sociopath. But I want to be in a shape of someone with compassion, right? Now, there are many people who can and will debate that for many hours. I want to be more this, or I should be more like that, but I'm not, and I judge myself and this and that. None of that actually changes the shape because it's happening at low intensity. However, if we create enough heat in a dynamic, in the chemistry between two people, just like if we create enough heat in the chemistry between bronze or steel, if we create enough heat, liquidity occurs. And in that liquidity, we can become something different. It's all about the temperature and the intensity of the interaction. Now, because we know this, and because many of us have been traumatically shaped into horrific states of terror at high intensity, which is the nature of trauma, many of us are protecting this territory desperately. Like, I'm not going to get too close to anyone or anything, and I'm never going to let anyone affect me at that intensity again. However, this is a reflex based on the supposition that all intensity is negative, when in fact, intensity is neutral. If we want to transform in ways that are optimal, we've got to reach the intensity at which we become liquid, and then guide our new shape in a constructive, in a positive direction, which we can only do while we are liquid, right? And this is where a container is incredibly important, because, you know, if we take a bronze sculpture and just liquefy it and do not give it any kind of shape, direction, or container, it just becomes a blob of bronze on the ground. The sculpture is lost. But if we create a new container with intention, with design, we can recast bronze that is in one shape into bronze that has a new, superior shape relative to a particular intention or goal. And the level of warmth in the relationship is a combination of intensity and heat and dimensionality. So we have the heart, the mind, and the body. To have a 10x conversation, and again, going back to what isn't a 10x conversation, boredom and just being in your head is a Western norm. To have a truly 10x conversation engages the heart, the mind, and the body. So what does that look like in practical terms? Number one, going on a walk together and having a conversation, or if it's a phone conversation, you going on a walk and they going on a walk, or you being on the gym and they going on a walk, right? So moving, preferably together in the same time and space, but otherwise, like, I'm going on a walk for a moonlit walk, you're going for a moonlit walk, we'll talk on the phone. And so engaging the body while having a conversation. It's also one of the reasons why having conversations during, before, and after sex can be so valuable, right? When the goal is to connect, to see, to open, and rather than to create a sexual moment of release as quickly as possible, right? You can move, you can pause, you can eye gaze, you can pause, you can, how does this feel? What's coming up here? What are you noticing? How does this affect the way, what feelings are present? You can move through this liquidly with heart, mind, and body. But if you do not, you know, if you are together, you know, first of all, direct the topic towards what matters, the things that touch your heart. Secondly, engage in some form of touch. Holding hands, a warm 7-second hug, which elicits oxytocin, when you meet, when feelings are present, grief, etc., touching the shoulder, holding the hand, making eye contact, engage the body, right? Because one of the ways that you create heat is through engaging the heart, the mind, and the body. Another way that you create heat is intensity of attention. Another way that you create heat is intensity of intention. This is my goal for this time together. And another way is by time. You can kind of think of it as a fire, and that the alchemy of a relationship, of friendship, it doesn't matter the gender, is like a fire. And when you come together in that chemistry and ignite, right, you start to create heat. And it takes a certain amount of fuel. You have to contribute part of yourself. And this is speaking to the transformative element of relationship, the transformative element of spending time together. When you contribute the things that matter to you the most, like, God, I can't stand when my wife does this. I just can't stand it. You're putting that wood in the fire of the relationship. And when the other person says, I really want to understand exactly what about it is, tell me about that. Well, it's like when like, why did she do this and this and this? And tell me more. What do you feel? What is that? When both people contribute intensity, attention, there is an ignition moment. There is a potential for transformation, and also consuming the old wood, right? Turning the old wood into ash that can become nutrients. It burns up, right? Some of the emotion burns off. The same with exercise. If you will move your body and express what is there, these are conversations with yourself, but also with another. If you will work out while working through certain topics, it can be much better than therapy, where there's, just lay there, and then the therapist sits there. There's no intensity. It can take 20 years to do what you could do in one psychedelic experience because of the liquidity, because of the intensity of, I'm going to take the chemical barriers off so that all of my feelings and all of my thoughts flow through my body freely without inhibition. And so I can see something, I can understand something in a moment of time. So integrate the heart, mind, and body. Focus on the questions. Genuinely care about yourself, that's the beginning, and about the other. That's the natural extension. If you care about yourself, truly, you will care about the other, because there is no difference. It's just a different scale. Right? True selfishness is true selflessness. Self-abandonment is not selfishness, it's stupidity. Sociopathic behavior is not selfishness, it's narrow-mindedness. Right? There is a natural connection between self and other. So, intensity, attention, container, and iterative design. This is our pattern. What would be a 10x pattern? Like, we get together, don't have a clear beginning, don't have a clear end, think about other things, aren't fully present, don't tell the truth, don't have a goal. That's our pattern. A 10x pattern, let's talk about how we can have a 10x conversation. Let's talk about how we can have a 10x relationship. What would make it fantastic? And on this point, I also want to highlight making pain points conscious and diminishing them. One of the things I had, conversations I had with the male friend where we spent those 20 hours in a month was, what's everything that we tend to do that is irritating or bothers the other person? And how many of those could we just delete and sidestep out of the relationship to not have those irritants? And what are the things that would bring enormous value into our time together, and how could we consciously do that? And it's kind of a mapping process together. Now, another terrific conversation, right? And I would recommend the book Amazing Questions, just because every question is a quest, and in a good relationship, it is a quest together to explore value together. Every good relationship is a quest. And a good quest begins with a good question. Right? So make a list of 10 amazing questions. And then see if my amazing questions add to that. Ask yourself the questions and answer them. You can have an amazing conversation with yourself. And a 10x conversation begins with yourself, begins with knowing yourself, knowing what value looks like, knowing what form it takes, right? Right. So I know that a full moon walk, holding hands, with a midnight picnic, with someone that wants to see and be seen. Like, I know that's rich alchemical ambiance, male or female, lovers or platonic. I know that that's rich territory. That something exciting is going to emerge in that space, right? Now, I also want to say that some fires burn hot and need new fuel. For example, I burn very hot, and so I need to put new fuel into an ongoing conversation at least twice a week, preferably 3 times a week. I also need at least 2 hours, right? And preferably a little bit of open-ended time. So if a relationship has no substantive contact for a certain period of time, the fire goes out. When the fire goes out, you're starting from scratch again. It's not efficient, right? You've got to get the kindling carefully. You've got to redo it. You've got to let it burn. You've got to slowly add logs. You've got to wait for the heat to come up. And then you've got to get to coals, and then you can start burning things faster. It's similar with stopping and parking a car rather than being at 5th gear. You can go very fast with very little gasoline at 5th gear on a highway if you're already going 50 miles an hour. But if you park the car, you've got to get back on the highway, and you got to get up to speed. I like the flow and intensity of those fast relationships, right? They're staying continual, right? So that's 5 hours a week with conscious intensity, putting good wood in that fire so that it's rotating through. Now, everyone burns at a different temperature and a different speed. Some people, that's 5 hours a month. It takes them a month to burn through that. They have a different kind of wood. They have a different kind of fire. Their fireplace does not move through that, right? So 5 hours a month. But the point is, everyone has a point at which the fire goes out, at which you're no longer emotionally connected. Everyone has that point. And if you do not respect that timing in yourself and in your partner, the fire will go out, and when you get together again, you'll either be performing, going through the motions of intimacy, or you have to rebuild it from scratch. And what I like is fires that don't go out, where we say, look, the fire's getting a little low, let's spend a few hours and stoke it, right? Let's understand the rhythm, right? If you know, with different types of wood and different types of fireboxes, you may need to get up twice during the night to put one log, otherwise the fire's completely out in the morning, right? But things stay, if you'll just make that little effort to put in one log at 3 a.m. and one log at 5 a.m., the whole house is toasty. And when you get up in the morning, it's no big chore. You just add another log and it's instantly going. That space is vital to understand in a relationship. It's vital for a 10x relationship, but it's also vital for an ongoing 10x conversation. For one-off conversations, it's perfectly fine. You create a 10x alchemy in the moment, right? And you move on. So I hope this has been useful in opening your mind, your awareness, for what does it take, how to design, how to construct a 10x conversation.